Let us be among the first to wish you a very happy Thanksgiving this Thanksgiving week. We welcome you into another edition of Moral Side of the News. I'm John Blim with WHAS Crusade-For-Children. We have a panel here to talk about topics in the news, so let's get started. On this week's program, a rash of violent crimes sends Louisville Metro police officers scrambling and brings questions of what more can be done to curb the violence. Plus, Senate candidate Roy Moore faces another accusation of sexual misconduct should he withdraw from the race. We'll discuss these topics with our distinguished panel here today on this program, Moral Side of the News. With us this week are Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition, Dr. John Slider, Breckenridge Chapel Free Methodist, Father Tony Smith, St. Lawrence Catholic Church, Reverend Sally McLean, retired Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and Rabbi Emeritus Stan Miles, Temple Shalom. Up first on this edition of our program, Moral Side of the News, a violent week in Louisville, particularly Monday night. Louisville Metro police officers dealt with a series of shootings. The surge in violence and violent crime has many asking tough questions. WHS 11's Tabney Dozier has a response from the community and LMPD Chief Steve Conrad.
If government can't provide safety for its citizens, then government has a problem.
From two teenagers being shot in neighborhoods to a man and woman found shot in a car at this Family Dollar on Algonquin and Winkler Avenue, where the man, we're told, later died from his injuries. Monday night was a busy one for LMPD.
I think the men and women of the police department are working really, really hard to do what they can, but you know, there's some changes that need to take place, and they need to have more officers.
District 6 Councilman David James represents areas that have seen more than 24 homicides so far this year.
We as a city have to decide that this entire city has a problem if one part of the city has a problem. And we need to put the resources necessary to do a holistic approach and look at what it is that we're not doing right.
James says everyone must look from within for solutions. He says parents at home can do more to keep their children out of trouble. JCPS can do more, and so can police. James and fellow council member Jessica Green say while more patrols were beefed up in the Highlands after a recent murder, the same needs to happen west of 9th Street.
My heart is certainly with those folks in the Highlands, but this is something that people here, down here in West Louisville, it's becoming all too commonplace.
Chief Conrad is defending his staff on Facebook, saying his department did not handle the Highlands murder any differently, citing the almost $1.8 million that's being invested into overtime patrols in neighborhoods where more homicides occur.
WHS 11's Tabney Dozier reporting. We turn to our panel on our program, Moral Side of the News. And panel, we seem to be back on this topic very often on this program. What can be done to curb violence in Louisville? Your opinions?
Well, you can always do more. The biggest room is a room for improvement. Some of the issues that were raised there about resources being allocated, some imply that it could be disproportionate allocation of resources in some areas versus the areas of greatest need. That could make a difference. I mean, the resources always can make a difference. The Bible says money is the answer of all things, so resources do have a way of curbing results depending on where you invest your time, attention, and resources. Like with the rash that's taking place, that mentioned the rashes can break out in some strange places, and you can't always predict where they will break out, but you can exercise some control to regulate that word that is so often avoided. How some things occur and don't occur. Of course, it's taking place across the country. We hear about it. You know, mass shootings, another one, big one this past week at a school in California. Yeah. But the most you can do is regulate as best you can and pray. I was very active for years, a group called No Murders Metro, where we went all across the width and breadth of this city to respond to murders. And glad to say that during that period, murders did go down. I believe faith made a difference and presence made a difference. So, but I think that the attention needs to be given where the greatest concerns are. I mean, it's obvious, like you do in anywhere. The squeaky wheel gets oiled, where the hole in the heart, the tire erupts. You patch it. You give attention there. So, I think resources and attention to the areas of the greatest amount of murders and violence should be attended to in a way that they perhaps maybe are not.
Do we have the resources to patrol the whole city to the extent that the city would need to be patrolled? It seems like every night there's another murder, and for want of a better statement, it seems like we're getting blasé about it until, oh my goodness, the murder happened in the Highlands. Mm-hmm. We've got to do something about it. Well, yes, that murder happened in the Highlands. I live in the Highlands, but I was bothered because I think we need to be equally passionate regardless of which neighborhood the murder takes place in. That the people who live in every single neighborhood in our city deserve good and equal protection. And I just wonder if we have the financial resources in Louisville to provide that level of protection.
Depends on my response to you, Stan, is I would say no, we don't, because we really don't know what is the level of protection you're looking for. You're looking for a policeman on every corner. We need a lot more monies, resources, however you want to say that, to address this issue. But my concern and my response input is all of it we've heard on the media and even hearing here is all after the fact. We wait until we're responding. We wait until something happens.
Reacting.
And then we respond.
Reaction.
Let's begin a little proactive as a sense, but of course, we talk about, well, what's, my concern is not that so much the 13-year-old or whatever, 15-year-olds here are the mass shootings, that they have guns or whatever of that nature. That's another issue. We can get into that if you want to. But the concern is, what in the world, why in the world is a 13-year-old and 15-year-olds running around robbing people, whether it's a gun, pistol, bat, or what? It has to be addressed, I think, and here's my 2 cents showing how old I am and how ancient, but used to be, as they say, in school, public schools, private schools, in family life, you did something that was wrong and there were consequences. Now look at look at the Jefferson County, we have bus monitors. What do they do? It's like the commercial. You've seen the commercial where the guy's in the bank, he said, this is a bank robbery. He said, well, do something. No, I'm just monitoring, telling you there's a bank robbery. Or the dentist office, you have a terrible abscess. Well, do something. Well, no, I'm just a dental
I'm the observer.
monitor. Right. This is what, in our school system, it seems, not only in the public schools, but even I see sometimes in the private schools, there are no consequences. What are you going to do? Ask on the bus, ask someone to stop beating the other kiddo up? Or wait till you get home and then turn them in? I mean, how's that going to stop? But if you reach out and stop them, there are consequences on your part. I'm just saying that there's a cultural difference that has occurred over the generations, that we want total freedoms, but we want total security at the same time. And I would say, whatever resources you have, you're never going to please everyone, whatever part of the city it is. And this is not the first murder in the Highlands.
No.
I think that the tragedy is the 15-year-olds or the young people who are going to have to spend a majority of their life in prison. Mm-hmm. And so by the time they create that kind of violent crime, it's too late. It has to start young. It has to start with socialization. It has to start with knowing where your boundaries are. And unless somebody is teaching boundaries, then we will continue to have an issue. And when you have more people in concentrated areas, it makes it harder. But what a sad thing to think that someone so young will be in prison for so long.
I'll contest with Tony for the grumpy old man chair on the panel here. But and Clay, I think you were approaching and hitting on some of well, everybody has some serious things. If we ask government, the school system, which is a quasi-governmental entity, police to fix things, I think we're approaching it at the wrong end. Certainly police by presence. And I don't know if there was necessarily an imbalance. The Louisville Metro Police are organized in districts. There was probably a district commander that was responding to the Highlands situation. We're going to have to spend more money to have a police presence. Right. Government is not going to fix what are spiritual and moral and relational issues. They're not going to fix families. Matter of fact, they tend to mess families up a little bit more, from my perspective. that's another issue. we can
But
talk
maybe
about.
we expect somebody else to do it for us.
Well,
Maybe that's
yeah,
the change that's happened.
That's a broader way of
And-
saying what I
and,
would say. Yeah.
You know, it's even with the military. The attitude is, you know, well, somebody else will keep me safe, or if I'm going to an event, somebody there will keep me safe. It's always somebody else's responsibility. It never becomes your responsibility to pay attention to where you are, to pay attention to what your children are doing. So where have we come to that sort of, well, I will pay you so that I don't have to clean my house. I will pay you so that I don't, you know. So somebody is always opting out that way. I think.
Well, a lack of, I'm sorry, John, but
Go
I
ahead.
think you're hitting on it, Sally. In a micro example, you're saying the macro, we're keeping our
Right.
nation safe and keeping our community safe. People are not wanting to take personal responsibility for their families, for their children, for themselves. And that's part of our collective messaging, I think.
I'm wondering also, the person who was murdered had a weapon, and there was a gunfight, and he was murdered.
You're talking about in the Highlands?
In the Highlands.
The 30-year-old.
I'm wondering if he hadn't had a weapon, if under those circumstances he would have been mugged, his wallet would have been taken.
You're saying the weapon he had may have killed him.
Could have escalated,
Escalated the
Yeah.
contributed to the.
That's-
Well,
and
Well,
also,
we won't know.
there's another
Well,
factor too. We're talking about 3 teenagers. 4 teenagers. Okay,
4 so far.
should they be tried as adults? And what would the reasoning be? Yes or no?
And they have a criteria for that
Right.
to determine whether that switch turns on or off.
And I understand for the 15-year-olds, automatic 14, 13-year-old is going to be,
Right.
they're 14-year-olds.
14's the cutoff.
If it involves a deadly weapon, a firearm, or something
But
like that.
to respond to you, Stan, statistically, the odds are he would have been killed anyway. In fact, if you look at statistics across the country, those who have, for instance, concealed carries, whatever like that, quite often, more than often, the majority of the time, are defending themselves. They do not get mugged and robbed. So the fact that he has a firearm, did he know how to use it? One person I know very well has said to me recently, I want to get a gun for my protection. I said, before you buy a firearm, you should be able to answer a question. That question is, are you willing to kill someone with it? If you're not, then don't buy the gun. But I don't know. That's something we will not know. But statistically, I would say it would be better off.
If you own a gun, be prepared to use it.
you
To
its fullest
use it.
extent. Don't just try to scare somebody.
Right. You
Right,
pull it
you-
out and try to scare somebody, you will get killed with it.
It's ironic, I may be pivoting into another story. I know that the HAS is going to be running a special this evening, I think, on the evening news with respect to the
Right.
explosion of the concealed carries, and they're interviewing, ironically enough, a pastor in this particular interview. And I'm curious to see just what his response will be, but apparently, you know, with churches being exposed and so forth. So it's a delicate balance there. I think it's a micro discussion, what took place with the kids. And just about every case, people talk about the politicians talk about the middle class, the middle class. But I bet you, in 99.9% of these cases, those persons were poor. So they fit into a certain economic.
You mean the perpetrators?
The perpetrators were poor. Okay, I'm talking about in Louisville, the local.
Right.
So you've got a poverty issue. You have an issue here of the neglected with respect to policies and resources in areas, and there's reasons, and there's reasons, and the government can play a role because the government allocates resources all the time. All politics is who gets what, when, and where. What resources, and many of the persons who come from these areas are from, sad to say, neglected areas in terms of the last getting resources to create support and economic sustenance. So those issues have to be addressed. We talk about personal responsibility, but the government always has a responsibility as well. So I think there's a delicate balance there to be responsible for what you're responsible for, and don't be the one that's guilty of neglect and contributing to this problem.
Okay.
I'll go with you on that.
All right, I'll let it go.
We're going to move on to our second topic on our program
had a
today,
response.
moral side of the news. Alabama's U.S. Senate candidate Roy Moore remains defiant even as he faces more accusations of sexual misconduct. Many Republicans are asking him to bow out of the race. ABC's Tom Yamas has details.
Mr. Moore attacked me when I was a child. I did nothing to deserve this sexual attack.
Beverly Young Nelson says in 1977 she was a 16-year-old high school student working part-time at a restaurant where Senate candidate Roy Moore, then a local prosecutor, was a regular customer. One cold night, he offered her a ride home.
I trusted Mr. Moore because he was the district attorney. I thought that he was simply doing something nice by offering to drive me home.
But instead, Nelson says Moore drove her to a dumpster behind the restaurant.
Mr. Moore reached over and began groping me and putting his hands on my breast. I tried to open my car door to leave, but he reached over and he locked it so I could not get out. I tried fighting him off while yelling at him to stop. But instead of stopping, he began squeezing my neck, attempting to force my head onto his crotch.
Overnight, Moore denying the accusations.
And I can tell you without hesitation, this is absolutely false. I never did what she said I did. I don't even know the woman. I don't know anything about her. I don't even know where the restaurant is or was.
But Nelson says she has proof of Moore's flirty behavior, her yearbook. She says Moore wrote, "To a sweeter, more beautiful girl, I could say Merry Christmas," and signed it, "Love Roy Moore, D.A."
When he was at the restaurant, he would speak to me and would sometimes pull the ends of my long hair.
Back in Washington, a number of Republicans in the U.S. Senate have heard enough. Senator John Cornyn of Texas watched the latest accuser's news conference.
What were your thoughts?
Well, they're very disturbing. They're very disturbing. That's why I believe that it was appropriate for me to withdraw my endorsement.
11 Republican senators are calling for Moore to drop out of the race. 4 Republican senators have rescinded their endorsements, and 28 have said he should step aside if the allegations are true.
I believe the women. I think he should step aside.
If you win, you lose because you're coming to a body where people are already calling for your expulsion.
Stand by. Here we go. That was ABC's Tom Yamas reporting. Panel, let's move to the moral
Your
side of the news
standby
there.
didn't give us enough time.
Yeah. Should Roy Moore withdraw from the Senate race? That's a big question.
Oh,
well, I think he should, and I'm worried for the Republican Party because I think that there are forces afoot who are trying to destroy the Republican Party, and I see also forces within the Republican Party who are working desperately to make a Republican Party that is a respectable entity.
Is this a vast left-wing conspiracy?
I think it's a vast right-wing conspiracy, John. I think it's a terribly vast
I was joking. I was playing off of...
well, I'm not joking at all.
Well, I am, because I was your observation and concern. There's a myriad, well, not myriad, there's 3 areas. There's the political issue, legal, which I think, unfortunately, Mr. Moore is avoiding just because of the limitations, and then the moral issue. I
The moral side?
Yeah, I feel that we're probably competent to address that one, but they're all
That's
intermingled.
a good perspective.
From a political perspective, my encouragement to Mr. Moore, I guess he was formerly Judge Moore, is that he get out. I mean, he's hurting, along with what you're saying, Stan, a lot more than just himself. Mm-hmm. I know he had some personal goals in his life and aspirations, but you know, that doesn't necessarily mean you get a pass and go on to do whatever you like to do. Right. Legally, I think he's clear. Unfortunately, as I said, morally, I'm tending to, as the things stack up, as the allegations stack up, it appears more and more that, oh, no pun intended, that that he is guilty of some misbehavior. I'm trying to couch it because there's several allegations. and a lot of different age of consent issues going on too. So morally, I think that behavior is worthy of our condemnation. Well, and I'll leave it there and let other folks.
As the old wisdom of the age said, it's not so much guilt, to paraphrase, it's not so much guilt, but it's presumption of guilt. That'll do you in. And from a political perspective, on one side of the coin, that's true. The other side of the coin, though, it's as I remember, what is it, the Republican chairman of the state of Alabama, it's not up to us, it's up to the voters of Alabama. And so from a legal perspective and a political perspective, just strict, it's going to be up to those folks. My concern is, first off, I would say I personally think he should remove himself for what you're saying here. But my concern is if he stays in, not just what he's going to do to the Republican Party, but what does that say about the electorate he represents? You know, I think that adds to that fracturing of both parties. And says, I don't think that we have a two-party system.
Isn't there an Alabama mindset? And I'm going back 50 some odd years ago with George Wallace. I mean,
George,
Alabama has a whole group of people on the behavior.
But here's what I'm getting at, John. The mindset that we're Alabama and we're besieged and we're going to make sure that we're going to go the path we want, on the path we wish to trot, whether we're Democrats or Republicans.
Well, I think you're onto something there, Stan. I think the context and the environments that have a long and curious history in Alabama of getting things different. I won't say getting wrong, getting things different from the rest of the country.
Well, look at
with respect to the George Wallace's, respect to the famous being the epicenter of the civil rights movement back in the day, the famous letter that Dr. King wrote from the Birmingham jail. The bombing of the 4 little girls there, the issues that create that kind of hate, where these 4 girls were bombed and killed there in Alabama. And for so many years, the persons that were guilty of that never were convicted for many, many years. So I think that there's just a strange environment. As far as him being removed, we tend to have a strange attraction to sexual-related sins. I mean, it seemed to be irresistible. If it's have a sex nature, then it tends to be sexier to us than some of the other egregious acts.
Curious about it?
Right, yeah. Egregious acts. My concern would be his decision as a judge over the years. How much damage has he done in the courtrooms over the many years with this kind of judgment? So those would be the kind of concerns that I'll be concerned about, whether he should run or not. I think he shouldn't be in the race to begin with, and the people in Alabama do have the right to do that. That's why Alabama has been one of the many states that seceded from the Union. So that just echoes that whole sentiment there. I don't think many pundits have said it's a moot point. Even if the Democrat wins, it's temporary because it will eventually go back to red again. These are the same people that voted for Donald Trump. The sentiment is still there in the state, so that will still happen.
I want to hear from Sally, and then I've
something I think we're missing here. That's just a huge generalization, but it's been going on forever. Is men in power, and there is a certain responsibility that men have when they have this kind of power, and they know it. We're talking 14-year-olds, and we're talking several young women. I mean, I thought 16 was the age for statutory rape. Isn't it 16 years old?
It depends on the state. And I presume in Alabama
it would probably be 16. So we're
because
talking
that's the age of consent.
Girls that were being solicited, before they were 16. That's a very serious thing to have happen. And the other thing is the criminal system, the court system, that had 50 women come out against Bill Cosby and still didn't come up with a verdict. I mean, they're up against a system of men in power. And if men in power don't know how to control themselves, then they deserve whatever. But so far, talking about consequences, they've not really had to pay the consequences.
And men in power seems to be the pattern of the day. Most of those that are nominated by President Trump are men.
Not to disagree, but just to fine tune, I would say some men in power obviously do have a problem, an issue. I'm struggling to say it seriously enough, and I'm in agreement with you. Not all men do. I remember less than a year ago when Vice President Pence said that he doesn't go out to dinner with a woman by himself. He got ridiculed by the mainstream press.
Well, I think you can go over the top. I mean, going to lunch
well,
with
my
somebody or
point
going
is,
to dinner with somebody
if we
is not the same
overcorrect,
thing.
Yeah,
I
that's a
remember
veiled
I remember
piety.
Promise Keepers. You all may remember
I
that.
remember Promise
They
Keepers.
said
I remember
find the
Phyllis Schlafly.
limit and then take 2 steps back. And I've used that in my guidance of when I coached boys and girls, when I officiate girls sports. Find the boundary, take 2 steps back. Some men in power respond appropriately. And I don't want to sound like I'm excusing anything. My concern is, not concern, down the road. Is every allegation to be believed, and does every allegation disqualify a person from public office? I just want to raise that. Senator Al Franken, Thursday morning, has received an allegation.
And
Inappropriate touching and kissing. And I'm, should he resign as a senator? Senator Menendez is on trial for corruption charges. Hasn't been found guilty. I'm just saying we need to be careful and not rush headlong into every allegation is true.
And that's very true, but to Sally's point as well, if you look at U.S. Congress, it's just released today, what $2.some million has been paid out because of sexual abuse from congressmen who have their own rules.
I thought it was 15 million.
It was a bunch.
It was a bunch.
It
So
went back. It went
there's
back.
a slush fund to take care
It
of
went
legal
back to,
difficulties.
It's all
I think,
under
the
the, well, it's not on the account, I guess it's accounted for, but they
That's
have
taxpayer
different
dollars.
rules
Yeah, it's that, yeah.
that apply to congressmen as opposed to Cosby and others.
Well, and not just Congress is guilty, the church is guilty as well.
Yes, church as well.
I mean, the church has its own set of problems, and when it comes to this sort of allegation, and that's because primarily, forever, men have had power, and women. I'm not saying that women are innocent or that women wouldn't trump up some of the charges.
With you. I'm
You know,
saying,
Same here.
I'm thinking there are women who would do those sorts of things because that's the only way they get attention, or they're mentally ill. But so I know that happens too. So how do you, what is the correct way to protect yourself? Is it the Pence way? Well, okay, I think
would
that's over the
suggest
top.
that is a way to protect yourself.
Can we all agree on one thing? I have to wrap this up. That we want to wish everybody out there a
happy Thanksgiving.
happy Thanksgiving as we wrap up this
Think of the
edition.
Crusade-For-Children.
And the moral side of the news this
And all
week.
the
I want to
good things
thank
of life.
Clay Calloway, John Slider, Tony Smith, Sally McLean, and Stan Miles. And yes, we want to remind you, if you're looking to make that gift for the holidays at the end of the year, you can make a year-end contribution to the WHAS Crusade-For-Children. It is tax deductible, and you can find out more about that at WHAScrusade.org. Thanks for watching and listening to this program, Moral Side of the News. We'll see you next time.